going to introduce our first speaker. And he's a man, obviously I know really well, because he's my husband. And Andy has been heading up a joint organizer of the Symposium for many, many years now. And it's been very traditional that he does the Saturday morning talk. He is a prolific lecturer. I mean, he often has like 7 talks a week. It's just incredible the amount of people that he must have touched in his life. He's also a prolific author, and his new book, The New Heretics, you'll find it in the storeroom, is proving to be really pertinent for the times that we live in. So I'd like to welcome on stage Andy Thomas.
A bit of Vera Lynn. Do you know this song? We'll get to the chorus in a minute. And do you know what the chorus is? Think about what this means, right? We will get to the chorus in a moment. We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. There we are, that'll do. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And that's so important, I think, to raise that this morning, because it does seem extraordinary to me that it is 3 years ago that we all gathered in here in this way. So if you're new to us, it won't mean so much, but if you've been coming for a few years, as I know many of you have, you'll know that, to suddenly not be meeting for 3 years, we did online, that was lovely, but, it's not the same. It's quite something to finally be back together, as Helen was alluding to there. What I think is particularly interesting is that where we left off, right, it's turned out to be incredibly pertinent. So I'm calling this talk The New Heretics, after the book. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I really want to kind of go more broader than that, because I want you to read the book, so I'm not going to give it all away. But let's remind ourselves of where we left off. So back in 2019, I gave this talk here. It was called Censored, and I was discussing the fact that, freedom of speech was basically eroding away. That we were being left with being heretics, just to even dare to question orthodoxy or the things that we're interested in that we come to speak about here, that it was getting harder and harder to share that, because censorship was going into overdrive. And I made a kind of worrying prediction, which sadly has turned out to be more right than I thought. And I showed this slide of a curtain coming down on freedom and freedom of expression. And it's funny, because a couple of people afterwards, as time went by, said, you know what, at the time I thought you were being a bit overdramatic. But actually, I've now realized I was being underdramatic, because, of course, with everything that then followed, and the pandemic and all the rules that came in, suddenly that acceleration went even further than I had imagined. And now we're living in a world where you can barely say anything, or at least if you do, you'll be taken away from mainstream view. It's really serious now. And, here we are now in an age where, and we're doing live streaming today. Hello, everybody, if you're watching out there. And we're wondering, if we say the wrong thing, does YouTube pull the plug? So let's see what happens, eh? But the fact that we have to think like that, I've done some interviews recently where you can't actually talk about what you're talking about. So we're trying to talk about the events of the last 2 years and whatever, and they say, oh, but don't say it. So we're having these crazy interviews where you can't actually refer to what it is you're referring to, and you have to go around the houses to insinuate, because somebody out there has decided you must not question the orthodoxy. So yeah, we really are now in a time where, you know, you can have your video taken down, you can be deplatformed, you can literally vanish from Google searches if what you're saying doesn't fit what somebody on high wants you to be saying. And if you challenge, well, yeah, you're now really in trouble. And this is accelerating more and more, although there's two ways of looking at this. Some of you may have seen this report recently. This has kind of been building up for a while, but where they're interviewing especially students, and they're calling for less free speech, because they see it as offensive. And if somebody says something which upsets you, basically they have offended you. And instead of like in the old days where we would deal with that and we'd say, well, you know what, I'm going to stand my ground, I'm going to fight my case here. What do we do now? We say, oh, no, that person who's upsetting people, they must be stopped. They must be censored, basically. And that's the way things are going. Now, on the other hand, I need to share this with you. I do know some people who have said, hang on a minute, how do we know that this story in itself is not psyops? They want you to think that people don't want free speech so that they can then justify taking away what's left of it. And I mean, I can't prove which way round this is, but that in itself tells you something about the levels of polarization we're now in. For everything I tell you here today, somebody will interpret it in exactly the opposite way. And you're left kind of going head to head and not entirely knowing which way to go with it. But I will tell you that in my personal experience, yeah, I do think people are now, they feel more threatened by free expression. And that is, of course, why we're beginning to emphasize that more here, because we've always been, on some level, a bastion at the Glastonbury Symposium for free expression, and I now begin to realize that we need to actually make more of that. And that doesn't mean saying outrageous things for the sake of it or trying to upset anybody. That's not what we're trying to do. We just want to be able to have conversations about things we should be having conversations about. Does that seem unreasonable? But clearly to some, it does. So that triggered very much, this particular little book here. Now, I know some of you have read it already, but if not, I'm going to recommend it to you, obviously. But I don't want to do the hard sell. But I'm going to pay tribute to the publishers. Some of you may know Watkins Publishing. As far as I'm aware, this is the only book, The New Heretics, that is out there from a mainstream publisher that actually speaks up for us. Because the book says, look, let's understand why people question orthodoxy, why they choose to be new heretics in the face of what is now a new persecution. And if you don't understand them, right, and you just condemn them because the establishment is telling you to condemn them, where are you going to wind up with that? You're going to wind up not understanding the world you're living in. And this notion that if you stop somebody saying something, that it's made them not think that anymore is insane. But that seems to be the policy of what's going on in the establishment. They think if you silence somebody and you take them away from public view, that view's gone. Well, it hasn't, has it? Because if that was true, nobody would believe in conspiracy theories anymore. What's actually happening? Look at the polls. Belief in conspiracy theories going up and up and up. And of course, the more you try to stop people, well, the more they're going to be convinced they must be onto something. Which probably are. And again, that doesn't mean every conspiracy theory is correct or everything somebody in this world argues is right. But if you say to them, you must not express that, you've driven it underground and you're in danger then of risking extremism bubbling up from these dark places that we're pushing it into. So the New Heretics, it speaks up for us, but it also tells us that we also need to be careful that we don't dehumanize, because it's so easy in our drive to want to be heard, to lose compassion and lose that human quality. And, when you become a soldier for truth, and I've talked about this before, the danger is that you do that soldier thing where you get very hard after a while and you stop considering that other people might not see it your way. So we have to try to find a halfway house here. So I'm not going to go on too much about it, but I will just share with you the structure of the book, and then if you want to go and read it, please do. And the book opens by looking at just how polarized we are. I mean, the US Capitol invasion was a great example of that, whereby people basically believed in a conspiracy theory, rightly or wrongly, believe what you want, that the US election had been stolen. And of course, that then wound up with what is seen as an insurrection. And that, again, has just left people more divided, although they're trying to kind of crush all the people that questioned it. It hasn't made those people that did the US Capitol invasion change their minds. And indeed, it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next US election. But, Republicans and Democrats, they're so polarized now. It's almost like you've got a slow civil war going on there. It's not quite as bad here, but, nonetheless, we have our own polarizations. But it's everywhere. Left versus right, man versus woman, black versus white, blah, blah, blah. Everywhere there is polarization, but we're pushed into it. Boundaries are blurred, right? Advertising pushes you to react all the time, all the things that I've talked about here over the years. So I kind of lay out, look, we are made to be polarized. It's almost classic divide and rule. The more polarized we are, the more we're fighting each other, the more controllable we are. It seems kind of obvious to say it, but it's amazing how many people overlook that. So it lays out, look, how have we got to this? Where are we now? And then in the next section of the book, in 3 sections, I look at the imbalance of what we are allowed to say and not say. Try and find a source today that will actually tell you why people question certain things like VAX, right? And it's getting hard. It's getting hard to find anybody that will lay the argument out. The media won't. Oh, yeah, they'll tell you people question it, right? But that they won't actually tell you why they're questioning it or give you any detail on that. And people must be left thinking, well, these guys must be nutters, because then they're never shared with them why people do question. I dare to go into it in the book to some detail, not judging. The whole book, I went out of my way not to make a judgment, but to say, can we actually look at the issues and actually understand each other here? And lots of other things as well, right? From 5G to all the kinds of things we talk about. And going into the paranormal as well. The imbalance of the way these things are represented is huge, so huge. And it comes back to that problem that it doesn't change anything. It doesn't make people like us change our minds. So you lay it out, and I go into things like psychic phenomena, crop circles. Oh, yes, there's a chapter about that because of the lessons that some of us have been on a curve over the years trying to come to terms with something which is essentially mysterious. But they've been shut down as well. They've been shut down. And now, if you say you believe crop circles may not be all man-made, you're treated like a madman or woman in some areas. And that is not right. That is a huge imbalance. So the book lays out, not only for people that are new to this, why these debates exist, but it also relays it out for people that already believe that. Because we can get so sucked into what we believe and we stop kind of seeing the bigger picture, and we don't understand why those on the outside who are conditioned to reject what we're interested in are like that. But if you don't get into their mindset, if you don't understand them, then we're not going to be able to combat it. And we need to be effective. And us just shaking our fist and getting very angry will not be an effective way of combating it. So happily, the book then goes into a 3rd section where it looks at ways we can overcome this. And there are ways, the way we approach, the way we share information, it is crucial. And, this notion that there is no nuance, there is no grey area in the middle where all this can meet. I don't believe that. There actually is. I give an awful lot of talks, as Helen alluded to there, to generally very mainstream audiences, often about history and folklore, but sometimes about this kind of thing too. And I find they're much more open to it than you might think from what you see in the mainstream media. And it's just that you have to kind of approach it right, just open the little door, a crack, and then they see for themselves, hang on, there's something interesting here, isn't there? And they'll go and open the door themselves perhaps later on. So, don't despair too much, because you're given the impression with all the censorship that, there's nobody out there that thinks like us. But that's not quite correct. And the best compliment I had for the new Heretics was a lady in New Zealand who worked for the University of Auckland. So they had a lot of protests during lockdown and that about all the obvious issues, and people were saying we need freedom of choice, and the establishment saying you can't have freedom of choice. And she wrote to me and said, I am actually pro-establishment, I need to tell you that, but reading your books made me understand why people question. And actually it's given me compassion towards them. And I thought, whoa, yes, that's such the best compliment I could have had. And she said, I haven't changed my mind about what I believe, but I now will allow other people to have their voice. But we also need to do that. That has to work two ways. If people disagree with us, right, we have to try to get into their mindset to understand why they disagree with us. Because if we don't, and we just wind up just demonizing them, and this got alluded to in some of the talks yesterday, right, you are also not dealing with the issue. There's some meeting point in the middle where we can actually share. And it's really worth trying. I call it the quantum thinking approach in the book. Trying to get into the mindset of those that disagree with you. And it's really worth trying it just for a short while, right? So think of something you feel passionately about. And then, and this is really interesting because the brain resists doing this, imagine you don't believe that anymore. And it's funny, and your brain goes, oh, no, you mustn't do that. And it resists. And that's where you have to push over and say, no, ignore that. What would it feel like to believe the opposite? And that doesn't mean you'll change your mind ultimately. But then you go, oh, yeah, God, I see. I see how it might look from the outside. And then you can have understanding of what they on the outside will need to hear if you want to make an argument for the stuff that we feel strongly about. And by doing that, right, you've also realized why you believe what you believe. So I can vacillate sometimes and think, oh, maybe I'm wrong. But usually I'll come back to where I felt sort of, the truth was. But at least now I feel, okay, I've understood what it is on the outside. And then you keep that compassion. Because when we lose our compassion, and there are some in the truth world that do, and get very kind of hard-nosed and very sort of aggressive about, pushing out there what we believe, we lose something. We've got to be better than the forces that we're fighting, yeah? So this is something that comes out of the book. And at the end of the day, one of the big things that I learned was that we choose our truths. Knowing 100% what the truth of something is, right, whether it be in the conspiracy world or the paranormal research world, is actually impossible. You can believe something, and you might be right, but absolutely proving it, that's not so easy. In the end, we choose our truths based on probabilities rather than absolutes. And, just to accept that gives you a stronger position. Because when we argue for things, that actually is very hard to prove. And look, there's mainstream scientists arguing with each other. You saw Ronald Hutton's talk last night. Archaeologists argue with each other, and they can't agree, and yet they're all equally qualified. So we choose, in the end, we choose our position based on our own biases. And just to understand that is a very valuable thing to do. Having some evidence for what you believe also helps as well, by the way. Otherwise, it is just a belief. So that's the new Heretics. I really recommend you read it. If nothing else, it makes a very good doorstop. Because it's not a quick book. I do get that. But I felt we needed to really get into the arguments. Now, the cover is the eye, of course. And some people might think, well, yeah, but isn't that the enemy? Well, yeah, it is. So we were trying to find symbolism that would speak very quickly about, basically what we're up against. And the eye, it's just become classic, isn't it? The eye over the pyramid. And the way I see it is that we're trying to own the eye now and turn it back the other way and turn that eye back on those that think that they've got, one over on us with their eye. Well, how about us putting our eye on them? So that's how I felt about the cover. And that's why the eye is one of the motifs. And boy, do the people out there need that eye put on them. My God. What's so fascinating is, so we've just been through this debacle of Partygate. If you don't live in England, right, forgive me, we're going to talk about English politics a bit, but I'm sure you've got the idea. One of the arguments I make in the new Heretics is that we have a tendency in the alternative world to think that mainstream politicians have no influence on our lives. I don't agree. So yes, New World Order, yep. Shadowy organizations, yes, they do exist. and they have great power, and often we don't hear enough about them. So yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean the people at the coalface don't matter. And I give some demonstrations in the book as to where actually it has made a huge difference. And I mean, at the end of the day, when you've got somebody in power who has no integrity, essentially, that is a rot at the core of a system that is going to affect everybody or infect everybody. And I'm not going to get into who should be running the country, except I will just say something about the candidates in a moment. However, right, we need to accept they do influence our lives. Now, you know, people like Boris is seen as a figure of fun. And I'll give you another example, Michael Gove. Right, if you don't know anything about English politics, right, look up Michael Gove. So Michael Gove is seen as a bit of a silly figure, a figure of fun, and, you know, he split up from his wife recently and he's been caught dancing in nightclubs like that's a crime, but anyway. So we laugh at him, he's like, oh, silly old Michael Gove, and he's got a posh accent and all the rest of it. And so you therefore assume that he probably isn't, you know, anybody to take very seriously. But, and this is a big but, Michael Gove, until recently, obviously everything's in flux at the moment, was one of the envoys chosen this year to attend the Bilderberg meeting. Yeah. So you think, oh, hang on, maybe he matters more than we think. So if you don't know, and I'm sure most of you do, the Bilderberg group is one of you know, a number of these unelected quangos with huge power over parliaments around the world. There's kind of weird occult undercurrents, and they basically don't share with us what they do, even though the decisions they're making, and these are global meetings, very high-powered politicians, even monarchs, people like Rupert Murdoch can turn up, and so on. They're affecting our lives. We're told we're not allowed to hear exactly what it is they discuss. So the people, therefore, that go to these meetings do matter because they are representing us. And Michael Gove this year was the one representing us and others. And in years past, we've had people like Ed Balls and Ken Clarke who've attended Bilderberg and had to admit that even in Parliament. But it's always brushed aside as a kind of harmless sort of business meeting. Don't worry about it, everybody. Only affecting your lives, you know. Don't ask questions. So yeah, actually, I think it does matter. And also look up Peter Mandelson, who's long gone from the mainstream, but he was a very powerful Labour politician, and he's absolutely in the New World Order hierarchy. And he doesn't even hide it. So yeah, the people we elect, right, for those that say, oh, I don't vote A because it doesn't change things, or B because I don't believe in any of them, well, the danger of that is if we don't try and encourage some kind of decent people up there, you'll wind up with this going on, and people that, yeah, you probably don't feel that good about pulling the strings. So I would argue it does matter. And just give you another example of where change can occur by voting. Look at the whole Brexit thing. Now, I spoke about that a few years ago here, and I still feel it kind of had to happen, but is it a debacle? Yes. Was it handled with any real vision? No. It was just the usual classic British fudge, which is an upsetting thing because it could have worked, could have been made to work. So it's the usual kind of mess, and we then have to clear it up afterwards. But the point I'm making here is, had we all voted not for Brexit, well, we, you know, those that did vote for it, had we not voted for Brexit, history would now be on a very different channel. That changed history. Make no mistake. And those that said, well, I didn't vote because it wouldn't change anything, I really do not agree. And that vote especially, because it came down to a kind of a 50-50, which was unusual in our elections, it changed the world, ultimately. Well, certainly our relationship with the world. So don't ever say it doesn't matter who's at the top. And here's another good example. Look, Mr. Trump, will he be back? We'll see. Or a Trump envoy, maybe. If you look at the interviews of people today that had to work with Trump as he went around the world and had various sort of meetings, they've all said it ran completely differently. Decisions were made that would never have been made like that under a previous regime. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, right? You can like Trump or not. Everyone has got a different view here, I know. But the point is that it mattered. And the people that they vote there, it matters. And they said he changed everything. He didn't go along, and many people liked him for this, he didn't go along with the usual restrictions or expectations on him. So this is where I would say we do need to engage with normal politics. No, it's not the whole story. No, absolutely it is not. But neither is it not part of the story at all. Do you know what I mean? We have a tendency in the truth world to trivialize what is going on at the surface. And I don't think we should, because, yeah, it's not the whole story, but it does matter. And especially now it matters, because we're at war. And by the way, yes, we are at war. Right? We're arming Ukraine, so we're now part of a proxy war with Russia. Right? Make no mistake, we are at war. It feels far away, and it doesn't affect our day-to-day life too much, but nonetheless, we're in a war. So the people making the decisions on our behalf, right, that's going to matter all the more, isn't it? We've just sent £1 billion to Ukraine. We've got people on the streets here who can't feed themselves. Anyway, you've got to think about that. It's a tricky one. I'm not a global politician because I wouldn't want the weight of decision either, but I'd like to hope those that do get to that stage really do have some kind of like proper judgment about these things. So in the truth world, and Jason alluded to this yesterday, you get an interesting view of what's going on in Ukraine. Is what we're told in the media the whole story? Almost certainly not, because it never is, right? Number one. Is Mr. Zelensky and his government 100% squeaky clean? No, probably not. There's a lot of accusations of corruption, and there is talk of far-right movements having too much power out there. Okay, I don't know. I'm no expert on Ukrainian politics. However, does any of that justify what's going on out there? Because some people say it does. And they say, oh, well, yeah, well, Mr. Putin, he's fighting the New World Order. So he's one of us now. And I'm thinking, I just don't see any evidence for that at all, right? If he truly believed that Nazis needed to be cleaned out of Ukraine, as he claims, right, why didn't he also in the same breath say, and we need to get rid of the New World Order, worry about it? He didn't. I've seen no claim of that anywhere. And yet the amount of people in the truth-seeking world that seem to think he's fighting for truth, well, forgive me, I see no evidence for that. Yeah, he might not be fighting on the same side as the New World Order. No, that's possibly correct. And he, I'm sure, being a strict nationalist, will believe that what he's doing is good for Russia, probably better for him and his own wealth. But nonetheless, yeah, I think he believes that what he's doing, you know, has a value to him. But whichever way you look at it, does that justify the rape, the murder, the pillage that's going on there that didn't have to happen? And in my view, it does not. Right? So let's be very careful that, you know, that thing about, you know, our enemy's enemy is our friend. I don't think it works like that, right? So we're in a very, very dodgy position at the moment. And I would add something here. If you want to read a really good article about what's truly going on there, read Terry Boardman's article. Now, Terry's spoken here many times over the years. Go into his website, 3man.org, and look up his article about the war in Ukraine. And he gives you the layers you actually need to truly understand what's going on. And he points out what's happening now is a pattern. And it's happened with other countries before. And we always find a country near Russia somewhere who we suddenly champion. And we give them arms and money. We don't actually get hands-on involved, and we let them fight our wars. So in World War I, it was plucky Serbia and, you know, brave, whatever country it is that year, and we build them up. And then what do? We drop them when it's all over. And already a lot of the resolve against Russia about we're not going to buy their gas or their oil anymore, that's weakening massively across Europe. And Putin knows that. He knows all he's got to do is wait. When all the gas goes off, probably they're going to come back to him on some level and not be quite so harsh. But there's a lot going on, a much, much bigger picture. Many a wonder, for instance, why didn't the West act earlier? I mean, okay, you can say this for Boris. He did make a big noise about it earlier than anybody else, but I think that was a career-saving move. I think we know that. However, Terry points out that there's a very long-running issue where America, in particular, is absolutely terrified of Germany and Russia uniting. And it's always been one of their policies never to allow that to happen. And the Nord Stream pipeline, that was going to bring Germany and Russia together. It's almost like by not acting, even though all these forces were massing on Ukraine's border, by not acting, right, it allowed Putin to do it. And certain minds are going, phew. Now Germany won't go in with the Russians. We've got to keep them divided. We are responsible for this war. Make no mistake. Right? Two things, really. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, we did not treat Russia well. We made many promises to them, and things we'd do, and doors we'd open. We didn't. And we just thought, oh, you know what, it's all over now, the Soviet Union. They'll become like us. We don't need to do anything. We did not, the West, I'm talking here, the West did not honor many of its promises. And what do you get? So you get a rise of nationalism. Right? We're partly responsible for that. And ditto Ukraine, we haven't treated Ukraine very well for years. We probably won't in the future either. At the moment, it suits us to leave them to do the dirty work, and who knows what will come out of this. Is it World War III? Well, some of you know me of old know I'm a little bit iffy about saying that. Everyone always says it's World War III, and it generally isn't. But nonetheless, it's a dangerous situation. There's no question about that. So just be aware, right? There's a lot more going on than meets the eye. And yeah, the media's not telling us the whole truth, to be sure. But equally, right, there is a hypocrisy at the core of all of this. You might see things like this, Putin's new era of repression. So the West is being very, very kind of down on how Russia are treating their people, and the censorship, and, you know, the people getting locked up for having the wrong views. Can you see where I'm going to go with this, by the way? Right? And you go, yes, it's very terrible, isn't it? But what's the first thing that happened when the Ukraine war broke out here? Right? And one of the big things we made a fuss about is they blocked the Western TV channels. Yeah? What's the first thing we did? We blocked Russia Today, RT. Now, I have some issues with RT. I think you're going to hear more about this afternoon. But nonetheless, it has a right to exist. Right? It has a right to exist. And yeah, sure, with a name like Russia Today, it's going to put the case for Russia, albeit subtly, right? So, all right, so suddenly we're basically at war with Russia. I sort of get why you might feel you don't want to just give them a propaganda window. But at the same time, we're doing to them exactly what they've done to us, but we're saying, how dare he block our channels, and we've happily blocked theirs. And the danger is, and it's this thing again about getting into the mindset of those that oppose you, now it's harder to hear what they are seeing and what they are saying. And even if I don't agree with what Russia Today puts out, it's good to know another side of it. And it often reports things in a way that are never reported like that here. So that's been blocked. And another thing that happened, and this happened within days, if not hours, right? People that said, hang on a minute, on social media, are we absolutely sure we're being given the whole picture here about what's going on in Ukraine? What happened to them? They got banned from Facebook almost immediately and other social media and taken down for daring to question the orthodoxy, right? They also now were heretics. By the way, the very fact that you're in this room now, here today, means you are a new heretic. You're a heretic. You're a heretic. Even if you don't want to be, the fact that you're here is too late. You've crossed, okay? You're heretics. But now, even if you just question something, even lightly about, maybe we don't know the whole truth about this, bang, you're off. Don't say that. So I'm afraid, right, the utter hypocrisy is awful. And you want to talk about repression? Should we go back a little bit to the anti-lockdown marches? Now look, it's very strong feelings about what's happened over the last 2 years, all right, and health choices and lockdown, should we, shouldn't we? Make your own minds up. But I believe people should be free to believe what they believe and have their say. And some of the anti-lockdown marches in London were some of the biggest demonstrations we have ever had in this country. So there's arguments about numbers, but they were huge. Do you know that some of the TV companies, especially the good old BBC, failed to even report all of them? Oh, yeah, they reported mini demonstrations about Ukraine or something else somewhere else, you know. But this going on in our capital city, bringing everything to a halt, it was almost like it hadn't happened. The only time that they would report it is if something terrible happened that they could blame on the demonstrators. So they would zone in on like 2 or 3, probably Asian provocateurs getting up to no good and say, well, look at these truthers. This is what you get, you see, if you let them have freedom of speech. That wasn't the big picture. Most people were very peaceful. They took to the streets and they made their point. And one of them, very famously, was broken up by the police. and all the PA system was brutally dismantled, people were manhandled. It didn't need to be like that. And we talk about Putin's repression, and we point the finger, but boy, they won't look at what they're doing here. So the double standards are absolutely awful at the moment. And it's funny. So in the world of truth-seeking, we have a habit of getting very het up about things that may or may not be true, like the Illuminati or whatever, and we've acknowledged, yes, there are controlling forces, but, people get very sort of solid about what they believe, and they fight for things that they haven't entirely proven. It's a chosen truth. But when you get something that is actually really genuinely happening and matters, like the online safety bill, I'm hearing almost nothing from truthers about this. Do you know about this? If you don't know what the new online safety bill is, right, do look it up. Now, it's currently in flux again because of the change of government, and that they say they're holding it back for a minute because of that. But equally, it might be because this is one of the most contentious pieces of legislation. So, people are worried, of course, about what people get influenced by online, especially children and grooming and all of that. So there are genuine issues, yes. But they've come up with a solution that the way to deal with this is basically to control very heavily everything, right? All opinions that do not fit with orthodoxy. And the worst thing of all, if this goes ahead in the way they're currently discussing, it will basically reveal your identity to anybody that needs to know it. Now, okay, that's good if it gets rid of trolling, which is not a nice thing, but equally, so anybody that doesn't like your political views, if you get a dodgy regime getting a lot of influence, they're going to know exactly what you believe and who you are and what you're posting, right? And that has massive implications. Because already we're seeing with a very heavy censorship that they've decided that people like us, even if you want to talk just about paranormal sometimes, should not be given a voice. And here's the killer line. So look this up, right? You need to know more about this if you haven't, right? They have decided that they're going to push the fringes of this out to cover things that are, quote, lawful but harmful. Think about that. So they're saying, well, there's some things on the internet, it's lawful, but we think it's harmful, and it will have to go if we don't like it. Now that's genius on their part, right? Because if you think something's harmful, well, what's the normal procedure? What do we normally do? We go to the law and we say, maybe that should be unlawful, yeah? And you write it into law. But they know that some of the things that they're trying to repress, it wouldn't get through the law courts. People would go, no, people do have a right to these views. It's not lawful to shut them down. So this, if it goes through, will give them the right to shut down anything that they just don't like without having to go through the decent system of the law. Think about that. Now, if you're into common law and free man and all of that, you might not think that matters. But the reality is, these are the decisions that we see in the mainstream at the very least. That is something that truly should be worrying, that every truther in the world should be screaming about, and I'm not hearing enough about it. Do something, write to your MP, better than nothing, right? Write some letters, do something, because if this does go through, we're in trouble. And who, right, so you think, right, this is going to give the government an awful lot of power. So the people that are pushing these decisions, by God, they better be the absolute top, the cream of the minds of this country, yeah? Who's the person currently in charge of making this work? Oh, Nadine Dorries. Now look, maybe she's a lovely person if you met her. I can't judge her, I've never met her, but generally what we see, and she's been on as many celebrity programs as she has in Parliament, does not make me think she should be given this level of power. Again, it comes back to, you might think the people you vote for don't matter, but I really think that they do. And yet she's about, if this goes through and she's still in that position, she's about to be given power over what we think, or at least what we can share about what we think. That needs action, folks. And, just on that score, very briefly, right? The general choice at the moment of people who are about to lead this country is grimly depressing, isn't it? Here's all the candidates we've had to become not just the Tory leader, but instantly the Prime Minister. Right, remember that, because I don't think they're going to go for an election at this point. And all of these people, one by one, have crumbled away. And now we're left with these two people at the end here, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak, who only a few months ago was being openly in the mainstream accused of corruption. That's all forgotten now. He's a good guy now. And Liz Truss, who can't even give a decent speech about cheese, is going to be making decisions about our lives, possibly, depending on where this goes. It's funny, Helen and I, we have a little game sometimes where we imagine if we ran the world properly, who would you put in positions of power? And we think of all these wise and knowledgeable people. Now, it's probably likely they haven't got the organisational skills to ever actually run a government. But you think, yeah, these are the kinds of minds that should be doing it. And then you look at the kinds of minds that actually do get to the top and you go, oh my God. And although it's kind of funny on one level, it's deadly serious. There's no easy answer to this. The system that we have at the moment, and I discussed this in the New Heretics, right, is moribund. It allows the wrong people to get to the top, and unless we change this at grassroots level and start to introduce real integrity, even at local parish council level, right, this is not going to change. We might be looking at centuries before we actually get people at the top that really should be. It allows the egotists to get there. And I don't know if you heard some of the speeches. Boy, do these people love themselves. And all right, you need a bit of confidence, I get that, but oh, it's worrying. And by the way, talking of people that get to the top that probably shouldn't, I just couldn't not share this one with you. I know, it's horrible, isn't it? Look, Mr. Blair, again, I've never met him, right? But look, this is a man who many people see, that is the accusation, that he's got blood on his hands from all the terrible decisions over Iraq and other things, right? You know the story. So what's the consequence of that? Oh, consequence is he's now one of the highest paid speakers in the whole world. Right? He was at one point Middle East Peace Ambassador. Can you get your head around that? And this year, he's given one of the highest honours in the land, hence the strange costume there. He's been made a Knight of the Order of the Garter, which is not a kinky thing, but, well, maybe it is, but that's what they call it. So we've rewarded this man, right? You can be accused of God knows what, and they get rewarded and given the highest office. Whereas, meanwhile, somebody like this, Julian Assange, is about to be extradited to America unless something comes in very quickly to stop this. The court case has been going on and on. If you need a reminder, he was behind the WikiLeaks, and he revealed things about things that Blair and co were partly responsible for that needed revealing, right? I don't think he did everything correctly. I think mistakes were made, and I think there were also things he probably should have revealed that he didn't for reasons of his own. But nonetheless, I think he did the world a service. He revealed the horrors going on that were not being declared in the mainstream. Now we know they are. And what's happened to him? Instead of being given a medal, like he bloody should have been, he's about to get sent away where you're never going to see him again, right? I think that this is, again, something that not enough people in our world have stood up for. And even I probably haven't done what I should have done. But look, if you have any influence now over the next few weeks, right, if he goes, we all go, right? If he, who did some good, goes down and is in a jail until the end of his days somewhere in another country, right, where does that lead? Because before you know it, we'll all be going on extraordinary rendition, perhaps. It's grim. Do something about it while you can. So I talk about things like this in the New Heretics, but there's other kinds of heresies. And given just the events of the last week, I just wanted to just say something about this, because I talk about those that do question climate change. Now, I do believe climate change is going on. Personally, I do. But when you see icons like there's 0 questions about climate change, you hear that now, don't you? There's no questions anymore. This is how it is, and we know because of the science. Well, the science says that the Twin Towers came down by bad design, Well, make it up what you will. It's not true. And in the New Heretics, I give links and list of the climate scientists that are not convinced that we don't have questions about climate change. Yes, it does seem to be getting warmer at the moment. Is that the ultimate trajectory? We don't know. And they keep saying things like, it was the hottest day ever. When what they mean is it's the hottest day since records began a couple of hundred years ago. Now, in geological time, that's a sort of a different thing to say, isn't it? But anyway, okay, let's accept climate change is real. Let's accept, perhaps, for the sake of an argument, that we're contributing to it. We certainly shouldn't be polluting the atmosphere. It makes no sense, right? So we shouldn't do it. But let's just accept the hypothesis. What are the governments doing about it? All the people we've been talking about, that we elect to high office. So they talk very loudly about, oh yes, net zero, and we need to do something about this, don't we? And instead, what do they actually do? A war breaks out, and it's, oh, right, we need to go back to fracking. More oil fields. Start burning coal again. And on one level, I get it, because when we're very cold this winter, you might say, actually, it's stuff net zero. But equally, the point that I'm making here is they don't seem really very committed to what they're talking about, do they? And even before recent events in the new Heretics, I list some of the policies. And in the US, coal production is still set to go up. Even though Biden, right, is talking about trying to stop it, whether he will is another matter. So there are double standards. There's always double standards with these people that we elect to these offices. And here's the thing. We are so governed by fear. We know this. There's an old trope. We're all governed by fear. Yes, divide and rule. Fear is the key. We know this. It's everywhere. But even if you accept, right, global warming, just accept it for the argument, the way that it's put over is really interesting. And this is a meme that's been going around, but it's real, right? These are real weather charts. I'm just going to share this with you here, right? Here's an old weather map from a few years ago, 90s. 31, 35 degrees, nice, sunny little symbols there. Here's a current weather map, same temperatures or less, and it's all this kind of deep red scorch marks. And as it points out here, they show you these scorched earth symbols. That's the way it's sold to us. So things we just used to have thought, well, it was a hot day, wasn't it? Now it's end of the world. And if you think it's just Britain, by the way, all right, here's some Scandinavian weather action for you. Same phenomenon. So now, same temperatures we used to get, it's end of the world stuff. Now, I'm not saying it hasn't been extra hot recently, right? I'm not a climatologist, right? So we'll see where it goes. And like I said, I do believe we shouldn't be stupid. But nonetheless, you can see this is so seeded. Now, is it psyops? As some argue it is. This is deliberately seeding the fear. Or is it just a natural consequence that we are now so rooted in fear that this is the way we do things? And now, people just naturally go to the worst case scenario in the way they depict them. But it's quite funny, because when the first day of the big heat wave last week struck, and the media was talking like it was the apocalypse. And then you saw the news in the evening, and actually, the Brits were going, oh, isn't it nice? Oh, well, I was out there. Oh, we don't get weather like this very often, do we? And it was like completely different to what they were selling us. And then these people sunning themselves, even though they've been told not to sit out, it's like, whoa, we'll have a bit of this. It's just typical bloody English, isn't it, right? And then on the same day, in the jollity, memes like this were going around. I'll let you read that for a minute. I think the less said about this gentleman, the better. But yeah, then it all turned a little bit darker the next day when the fires began. And so houses burning down. I'm just going to go back and show you that in a minute. There we go. And then we thought, oh God, okay, maybe this is quite serious then. But you see the point, that there's a kind of a distance between what we're told and the way things are sold to us and maybe how things are. But that works two ways. I mean, I've seen people online in the truth world saying, well, these were caused by the New World Order. It's arson. And the same with all the fires around the rest of the world to make you think climate change is coming. And you just go, oh. It's back to that, what do you choose to believe? I don't know. Look, it was hot. It seems obvious to me fires were likely to break out. You can't really get around it, can you? But look, we get very het up, therefore, about things that maybe don't matter so much, or they're guessing, and we don't get heads up enough about things that really matter. That happens from mainstream places, but it also happens from the truth world. Because while we're being sold the apocalypse of higher temperatures, everybody's ignoring the real apocalypse. I've talked about this before, but I've got to say it again. This is the saddest slide I will show you today. There's a little patch of ground near where we live, and of course usually this was taken late June. Buzzing, bees, butterflies, beetles, nothing. And I mean nothing. The insect decline, right, is the real apocalypse. And yeah, there's a bit of talk about it in the media, but nowhere near the same talk that there is about global warming. People like Extinction Rebellion keep going on about global warming. I'm not hearing them directly addressing loss of habitat, pesticides, right? Just look around you. You don't need to believe anything you're told in the mainstream to see that this is real. Look around you and see how few insects there are. When they go, we go, right? Be very clear about that. But it's funny, I just don't get it seeing the same attention. You got people gluing themselves to the motorways arguing about insulation. And you think, why aren't you gluing yourself to the motorway because of this? Or gluing yourself to something. So we have a very strange disparity between what we make matter and what we don't. I want to thank Francis Beasley for showing me or sharing with me these photographs. I'm torn about this. These images here are from the Brighton Children's Parade recently. And you can see there was a big theme of biodiversity and looking after the planet. And it's lovely on one level, and whales and saving peat bogs and all that. And you think, well, that's kind of great. But interestingly, the more I looked through the photographs, and I wasn't there, but you realize, hang on, it's all issues. And these are very young children, and it's good that they care. I think that is a good thing, but how far do you go with that? Because at the moment, we are loading so much fear on them from birth, and if fear controls us, right, think about this, and it's like, well, okay, that's lovely, but why don't you just do something silly and fun for the hell of it, like we all used to when we were kids? But now they're so heavily loaded with issues, and that really worries me. And then in the next breath, what do they say? Oh, there's a rise in mental health problems with children. Children are having nervous breakdowns when they're 14 or whatever. And you think, well, yeah, because if you're loaded down with this much stuff and the worries of the world from point one, when you can't really do anything about it, mostly at that stage, well, what do they expect? So I'm worried, and fears everywhere. And also, just a quick Brighton note, I noticed this. This is a monument on Brighton Beach, which is made of an old ship that beached up there some years ago. And the whole point was it was interactive. You could walk on it, and it's all metal. You can't really damage it. Now, behind a fence, right? I looked it up, trying to find why is the fence there. I can't find any explanation as to why the fence is there. And it just seems to be the way of the world now. Well, somebody might hurt themselves on it. So we better put a cage up around it. And now it really looks lovely, doesn't it, with that fence around it? Yeah, great monument. So fear is all around us. And of course now, having had a couple of years or more of this, you know, we're always waiting for it to trigger again. And now, because of that, depending on what you believe, right, there does seem to be a rise in something that many people call COVID, right? But masks are arriving more now. And glass screens are going back up, and all the controls we thought we'd seen the back of are coming back. And you might think that's a very right and proper thing, but nonetheless, right, there's a feeling of the fear building up again, and we're all wondering when the next wave comes, what's going to actually happen. And now, of course, it's back to, well, you've got to get your VAX, even though we now know they don't stop you getting COVID. We know that, don't we? They assured us if you had your boosters, you wouldn't get it. But what they say is, well, yeah, but if you're boosted up, and I met a man the other day who's just had his 5th booster, right? And he felt very good about this. That apparently, if you do that, you won't get it as badly. Now, I've been trying to find direct evidence. There's a bit of statistical maybe in there, and myself and Barry, who you'll see speaking later on, we were trying to kind of get to the bottom of this. But I cannot see any clear evidence for that claim. Okay, no, so if you think this is a good way to go, that's fine. I'm not medically qualified. Do what you're told. If you feel good, don't. If you don't, free expression. But what I really don't understand is why the media doesn't challenge this story and say, well, hang on a minute, we were told we wouldn't get it if we had the jab. But they won't go near it. And that's when you realize they're doing the bidding of others, right? They won't go near it. And I think they fail us in a number of ways. And I mean, look, when the whole Partygate thing was going on, what was the one question the media did not go near? Was, well, hang on a minute, this bunch in Downing Street clearly didn't take it very seriously, did they? They were stopping people seeing their relatives and people dying and they never met them again. And you think, but wouldn't, if they really think they're the bee's knees, do they honestly think they're completely immune to this? Clearly not. They obviously didn't think it was that serious, but the media won't go there in the same way that the media will not go near reporting the number of adverse effects from VAX. Won't go near it, even though it's official. There's official figures. And I understand on one level, because if you do believe in the official sort of way forward, well, yeah, you don't want to put people off going down this line. But what you do is, if you don't discuss all the evidence, what do? Those that doubt it get ever heavier about it. And they believe, well, there you go, they're covering it up, which, of course, they are in a way. But then people then go to the extremes. So they are not helping themselves by doing this. One little note I want to add, though, right, back to people that are... yes, sort of leading us. I will say this, and I know some people don't like me saying this, but it's true. In my view, over the last 2.5 years or so, people like us were probably lucky to have somebody like him. Because had we had somebody else and certain other leaders that you can think about yourself or other parties, I think many mandatory policies would be in by now. And I think something about his nature, although it's part of the flaw, actually served a little bit of free choice. Right? If you disagree, come and see me later. But I think we will look back one day, depending on who comes into power now and another wave comes, and you might look at these as halcyon days when we had a lucky miss. I share that thought with you. But look, it's not all bad news. It's not all bad news. So we saw, right, what is the best name ever? Novak Djokovic, or Novak Djokovic. It's fantastic. So he stood his ground. He didn't want to go the official way. And again, you can think he's wrong, whatever. But he said, no, I'm going to exercise my free choice here. And he did. And I thought that was very hopeful, even though it stymied his career in a number of ways. And he was kind of careful what he said. He didn't go as far as I think some people wanted him to. But nonetheless, the point was made. And I'm seeing signs now off the mainstream starting to speak up. Some of you might know GB News. Now, look, it's seen as a bit right-wing, and I don't have it on my channel, but I've heard the radio station a few times. But they do have now mainstream people like Neil Oliver. Yeah. Saying the most extraordinary things you never thought you'd see on a mainstream channel about everything from lockdown to you name it. And you think, I can't believe I'm hearing this. And GB News is an independent station. Let's hope it stays independent. And it's not a conspiracy channel, don't get me wrong, but it's edging more and being daring in what it's saying. And what's funny is there's some old BBC programs with Neil Oliver, who used to be a big history presenter, where he's a bit kind of mocking of conspiracy theories. And now you hear what he's saying. God, he must eat his words now. But it's encouraging. So people are beginning to think, yeah, hang on a minute, can we not at least have the discussion? That I think is a good thing. He also did a very good tirade about the World Health Organization. You might not know this, but they've been trying to bring in this kind of global agreement where every country does what they want them to, that basically overrides their parliaments. Now, the good news is a number of countries have said no to that. And so they've been held back from this. But, you know, they want the power to basically tell every government what we should do with our health. Bear that in mind. And he spoke out very bravely against it. So I think there are people that want to float above this. And you see evidence of this all around us. This is a meme, by the way, from an advert you might have seen. Have you noticed in TV adverts over the last couple of years how many floating people there are? There's an awful lot of floating people. And it's either a strange psyops again, or it's evidence that we feel we need to rise above what we've had before. And one of them, the Burberry ad up there, right, is over this beautiful kind of wheat field, which of course makes us immediately think of things like this. I have an announcement for you, by the way. Tomorrow morning, we should have had Paul Jacobs talking about crop circles. Sadly, we've just learned he can't make it. So I'm going to come, as it's such short notice, I'm going to do my history of crop circles. So if you want to see me do that, you've got to be in here at 9:30 tomorrow, all right? If you don't, you think, oh, God, I've seen all that before. That's all right, have a lie in. But otherwise, I'm going to fill in. But he was going to talk about it. You saw Hugh's images yesterday. It's a quieter year than some, no denying, but there's also been some staggering stuff going on. And in the new Heretics, do read the chapter about crop circles, because it reveals so many things about what we believe and what we don't believe. And those that came through that, I think we learned from it. Right, so I need to conclude, but I just want to say two more things. I think that Britain matters. I mean, it's interesting. England especially, we've had more crop circles than any other country, yes? So there's something about us that constellates things. But things are changing. Will the union survive? I don't know. Don't know what Scotland's going to do. The whole Brexit thing, we are changing. Let's step up and have a bit of vision from somewhere. Things are about to change massively. I mean, even if you think she's a lizard, when this lady goes, everything's going to change more than you think. That's the last link with the days of empire, right? Our country's about to change hugely. And when that happens, we're going to have to really decide who we really are. And talking about people passing, I just want to make a brief nod here. Because in the last few years, since we were last here, we lost Michael Glickman. He was a stalwart here for many years. He was a cantankerous old sod, but we loved him. And he spoke out for the crop circles, and he stood up for what he believed in. And he passed away, and I pay absolute tribute to him. He always did this first slot, Saturday morning, and in the end I took over from him. So listen, I pay tribute to Michael. And there's somebody else we need to pay tribute to. There's Ian Crane. Ian Crane. He stood up for what he believed in. He literally put his money where his mouth is, right? And he had some money, he could have lived comfortably. What did he do instead? He went and lived on a fracking camp, right, in an old caravan, because he believed that much that he had to stand up for what he believed in. And he dies at age 64. A loss, but nonetheless, let's celebrate him. Now, those are people that have passed. There is one person I should mention who is absolutely very still with us, who's now going to be ever so embarrassed by this. But I do need to mention Sheila Martin, who's sitting down there, who, if you don't know, has basically been part of this event forever. And finally, after 2019, decided it was time to do some other things with her life. But here she is, still with us today. This event matters, and it takes an incredible amount of work to pull it off, right? Don't underestimate the work that we have to do to make this happen. And for years, Sheila was the matriarch of the Symposium, right? Without Sheila, this wouldn't still be going. And we want to make a little presentation to her. So Helen, to say thank you to Sheila for everything you have done over the years. A massive hand for Sheila Martin. Because believe me, people like this matter, right? You might not see them on YouTube every day, but without people like this, without people like Di and Jason and Helen and all the people that work on this, this would not be here. And to close, I do want to say this. We did think, when Sheila said, at the end of the last one, okay, I'm done. And then COVID hit, we thought, is this a message? Should we stop? Maybe we're done. We're done. This is our 30th year in the hall, by the way. 32nd if you include the online ones. We did think maybe it's time to stop. But then, as I saw the injustices and all the freedom of expression being crushed, I thought, you know what? No, this is absolutely not the time to stop. We're really encouraged that so many of you are here this weekend, right? It's fantastic. Because we did wonder, maybe our time's done. But actually, I don't think it is. We are now needed more than ever. What you learn in this hall matters. And I always say this, right? Take it out of here and share it with other people. Read the new Heretics, because it gives you a lot of advice as to things we can do, not just sit and listen, right? There's still things we can all do. So do read it. And remember this, if we don't turn the eye on them, they will keep it on us. And if we do nothing, we will look back one day and think, shit, we should have done something. So yes, sit here and listen and have a lovely weekend. Do. But also, when you leave here, as ever, go out there and then do something with it. Because we, people like us, and all the other gatherings and groups doing this, they need to exist. So get out there and fight the good fight. And thank you for listening. Thank you very much.